As the 2016 presidential election gets closer and closer, more and more first worldists are jumping on the Bernie Sanders bandwagon, saying that he's a socialist, so therefore we have to vote for a socialist. But before we get into why Bernie Sanders is not a socialist, let's ask ourselves one important question. When have you ever heard of Bernie Sanders saying he wants to get rid of capitalism? Why do you think so many non-socialists want to vote for him? Why is it that there are so many liberals who want to push for Bernie Sanders as the head of the Democratic Party? They're not socialists, so why would they be supporting him? Because Bernie Sanders represents to them what first worldism is, what liberalism is. Changing things without actually changing anything. Having a revolution without a revolution. Because he's the nice, safe, white, liberal way of getting change, of getting concessions out of the capitalist class. He doesn't fundamentally challenge anything. We don't even have to use violence. We don't even have to actually do a revolution to get the things we want. And that's why he appeals to so many people that aren't even socialists. You know why revolution is necessary? Because the bourgeoisie own capital. They own the means of production, they own money capital, they own it all. In the end, any politician, including the state, works for the capitalist class, which is why we have the term bourgeois state. There is nothing Bernie Sanders can actually do that will challenge capitalism in any way, shape, or form. He can't, because it's still their system if they are left with all of the power. Here's a really good question. If Bernie Sanders is a socialist, why is he running for the head of the Democratic Party? Does that make the Democratic Party a socialist party? Because, I mean, if we're supposed to vote for him because he's socialist, then wouldn't that make him the head of a socialist party then? No, it wouldn't. It doesn't make any sense. If Bernie Sanders really posed any kind of a threat to capitalism whatsoever, do you think they'd even let him run for president? Would he even be able to get into the contendership for the head of the Democratic Party if he actually was going to oppose the capitalist class? Do you think that would really happen, that they would just let him walk in the door like that? No, they wouldn't. These should be enough red flags, so to speak, that Bernie Sanders may not be what he appears to be. As Lenin said, a revolution is impossible without a revolutionary situation. Overall, Bernie Sanders advocates taking your guns away. Sure, he wants to get rid of a waiting time for handguns from a federal level, but he does believe in some protections for gun manufacturers, and he does want to ban assault weapons. Well, Marx said the workers had to be armed and that any attempt to disarm the workers was inherently reactionary. Well, if you're trying to take military-grade weapons, at least assault rifles, out of the hands of working people, then you kind of are doing the opposite of revolution. Here's a nice progressive thing. Bernie Sanders wants to make an amendment to the Constitution that would ban unlimited funding from non-government organizations, non-profits, and corporations to political candidates. I mean, that's a great, progressive position. Except he should be calling for the abolishment of the Constitution and the writing of a new one. The Constitution is an insanely old document that stands on the basis of slavery and private property as a right. If you're a socialist and you're trying to bring socialism, aren't you trying to get rid of private property instead of trying to amend a system where the bourgeoisie have less funding power, as if that's somehow going to stop the capitalist class from owning everything or exercising that power in society? No. His position is completely anti-socialist. He should be getting rid of the Constitution, not trying to amend it. Let's also keep something else in mind. He supports the troops. He supports making sure veterans have sufficient financial support, or they're well taken care of. Or what about the victims of the troops? What about the financial security of all the places that the troops have destroyed at the orders of the U.S. government? Or the U.S. military is the biggest terrorist organization that has ever existed. What about the victims of that system? But he's not concerned about them. He's only concerned about the troops themselves. He's only looking at a narrow nationalist front. That's all he cares about. There is no solidarity across the world. He doesn't particularly care about the poor and exploited. He's only looking after Americans, trying to get regular working Americans more than they have Now, there is no concern for the victims of the system. Another big part of being a socialist is abolishing capitalism, something that he isn't saying that he's going to do. But he has in fact said the opposite. He does support taking measures that try to preserve capitalism. While calling for an audit of the Fed in 2011, he also recommended a bunch of other reforms, like forcing the Fed to make and forcing banks to make loans to small businesses to get small businesses going, because that's where the real engine is, by having more competition and having, regular working people become capitalists themselves. So Bernie's essentially trying to save capitalism by trying to rebuild a middle-class, petty bourgeois position. I mean, what's up with that? You should be trying to destroy capitalism. You should be advocating getting rid of small businesses and large businesses. You're a socialist, for Christ's sakes. Well, I mean, you say you are. Then you should be trying to destroy capitalism and build socialism, not the opposite. The biggest argument made for Bernie Sanders is that he'll be good for people. Well, not really good for the Palestinian people, which he defends the murder of via Israel. And he has outright said that Israel has the right to self-defense. By that, he means taking more Palestinian land and killing more Palestinian people. But this main thing keeps getting overlooked by a lot of first worldists. He's good for us. Well, maybe he's not that good for Palestinians, but, he's good for us, so we should vote him into office. I mean, that in itself speaks to the first worldist mentality perfectly. I just want for me. I don't care about anybody else. This is our system. We're only looking out for ourselves. We don't really care about the victims of our system. We only care about us. And that's what Bernie Sanders really represents. Just getting for me, and to hell with the people who are actually victims of the capitalist system globally, particularly as it pertains to victims of the United States. So in the end, Bernie Sanders is not a socialist. He couldn't give a damn about anybody outside this country. He couldn't give a damn about the people who are victims of U.S. imperialism. He panders to the troops, yet he advocates the global poor, particularly Palestinians, continue to be killed by U.S. tax dollars, essentially, and defends the right of Israel to murder Palestinians. Bernie Sanders does represent the very epitome of first worldism. Me, mine, and to hell with the rest of the world. So if you say you're a socialist and you're going to vote for Bernie Sanders, you're doing the opposite of socialism. Bernie Sanders is the opposite of socialism. He's a social democrat at best. And for those who keep thinking that he's a democratic socialist, I'd like to remind you that there is no such thing as a democratic socialist. It's one of those Wikipedia Marxist ideologies that doesn't even actually exist. Socialism, by its very definition, is democratic. The term democratic socialist is just the thing of bashing what socialism actually is, taking the authoritarian revolutionary aspect out of it, which is the very thing that makes it what it is. Democratic socialist is nonsense. It's not even an actual thing. It's just something people made up so that they wouldn't have to do revolution, which is what the whole point of Bernie Sanders is. We can have all of our nice revolutionary changes without actually having a revolution. And that's what all of this is really about. First worldists looking for an excuse to actually avoid having to actually do revolution.